Everyone in the courtroom thought Adrian Brooks was in over his head. At 19, with scuffed sneakers and trembling hands clutching crumpled papers, he looked like a lost boy until he opened his mouth. The courtroom was abuzz, with the quiet murmurs of restless spectators, their attention shifting between the imposing judge at the bench and the young man standing nervously by the defense table. The walls of the Kingsford County Courthouse bore the weight of 100 past verdicts, but today the tension in the air felt unusually charged. All eyes were on 19-year-old Adrian Brooks, a slim, unassuming figure in an ill-fitted shirt and a pair of scuffed sneakers. He clutched a few disheveled papers in his hands, his knuckles whitening under the pressure. Behind the bench sat Judge Barbara Stone, a name synonymous with authority and sharp rebukes. Her reputation as a no-nonsense jurist preceded her. She wasn't one to mince words, and her courtroom was no place for theatrics or excuses. To her this case seemed like a trivial matter, another young person wasting the court's time. She didn't hide her disdain as she peered over her glasses at Adrian. "Mr. Brooks," she began, her tone clipped. "You do realize that the court does not take kindly to individuals showing up unprepared, don't you?" Adrian cleared his throat, a faint tremble in his voice. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." The faint chuckle from the gallery wasn't lost on him, nor was the judge's subtle smirk. It was the look of someone who had already decided the outcome before the proceedings had even begun. Barbara leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Very well, proceed, Mr. Brooks. Let's see what you've got." From the outset, it looked like a case destined for failure. Adrian, representing himself in a minor traffic dispute, appeared as though he had wandered into the wrong room. But what everyone dismissed as naivety was something far more remarkable, a secret that would unravel before their very eyes. But as Adrian opened his mouth to speak, what followed left the room in stunned silence. Adrian inhaled deeply, his fingers tightening around the edges of his papers. The weight of the room pressed on him, hundreds of eyes, each one scrutinizing, doubting, judging. Judge Stone tapped her pen against the desk, her impatience palpable. "Mr. Brooks," she said, arching an eyebrow, "if you're not ready to proceed, I'll be forced to dismiss this case. You understand that, don't you?" A ripple of muted laughter spread across the gallery. Adrian lifted his gaze, his voice steady, despite the nerves etched across his face. "I'm ready, Your Honor." Barbara sighed and gestured for him to begin. "Then get on with it." Adrian stepped forward, the shuffle of his worn sneakers echoing in the hushed courtroom. He glanced briefly at the opposition, a seasoned attorney with decades of experience etched in his confident posture. The man gave Adrian a dismissive smile, as if to say, "This will be quick." Adrian began recounting the incident that brought him to court, a disputed speeding ticket. But instead of fumbling through a generic defense, he outlined the events with striking precision, referencing timestamps, road conditions, and even the officer's exact position when the ticket was issued. His delivery was deliberate, and while his tone remained humble, there was an unmistakable confidence building beneath his words. The judge leaned forward slightly, her pen slowing as she jotted notes. Adrian continued, citing a statute from the California Vehicle Code with startling accuracy. According to Section 4080, to be, Your Honor, the method used to determine my speed may not be admissible under the conditions stated by the law. Judge Stone's brow furrowed. She hadn't expected him to pull out a specific statute, let alone use it effectively. The courtroom, too, began to shift. What had initially been mild amusement turned into quiet intrigue. The opposing lawyer cleared his throat, interrupting. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The statute doesn't apply to this case. Adrian didn't falter. With all due respect, it does apply. And if I may, he walked to the evidence table, pulling out a diagram he had sketched himself. It wasn't flashy, but it was detailed. Every angle, every distance accounted for. This diagram shows why the radar used couldn't have accurately captured my speed from where the officer was stationed. Judge Stone blinked, caught between skepticism and genuine surprise. Adrian had just challenged the expertise of the opposing counsel and done so convincingly. But as Adrian turned back to the gallery, he wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning of his case. The courtroom, which had been restless moments ago, fell into a silence thick enough to feel. Adrian glanced around his eyes, briefly meeting the curious stares of the gallery, before looking back onto the judge. He had started to steady his voice, and with each word a quiet confidence seemed to bloom. "Your Honor," he continued, his tone now firm, "the foundation of this case rests on the credibility of the evidence presented. If the evidence is flawed, then so is the charge against me." He turned to the opposing counsel, his words respectful but pointed. "May I ask if the prosecution can confirm the calibration of the radar gun used during the stop?" The seasoned attorney shifted in his seat, clearly caught off guard. "We do not have that documentation readily available, Your Honor, but it's a standard procedure." So Adrian held up his hand slightly, not to interrupt but to ask permission to proceed. Judge Stone, her curiosity now piqued, nodded. "Standard procedure isn't proof," Adrian replied. "The law requires verification, not assumptions. Without that calibration record, the evidence cannot be considered reliable." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. People whispered among themselves, no longer laughing at the young man who had walked in, looking like he didn't belong. Even Judge Stone seemed to take a breath before addressing him again. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice softer than before, "you seem to have a deeper understanding of legal processes than most. Where did you learn this?" Adrian hesitated for a moment, then said, "I've been studying law since I was 13. Your Honor, I passed the bar last year." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the opposing attorney raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Judge Stone leaned forward, her expression hard to read. "You're telling me you're a licensed attorney? At your age, yes." "Your Honor, I've always had a passion for law." But Adrian paused, glancing down at his papers before looking back up, his voice unwavering. "I also know how people see me when I walk into a room. They assume I don't belong." The judge straightened in her chair, her demeanor shifting for the first time. The doubt in her expression gave way to something else. Respect. Adrian pressed on, presenting more evidence and carefully dismantling the opposing arguments. He referenced case law with ease, articulating legal precedent in a way that had even the most skeptical spectators nodding along. He cross-examined the officer's report, pointing out inconsistencies in the narrative. Each point he made was met with either stunned silence or murmurs of approval. But as the courtroom marveled at Adrian's brilliance, one question still lingered. How far could he push this case and the assumptions people had made about him? The tension in the room reached its peak as Adrian presented his final argument. He stood straight, his voice unwavering, and his demeanor now exuded the quiet authority of someone far beyond his years. The courtroom, once filled with dismissive chuckles and skeptical glances, now hung onto his every word. "Your Honor," Adrian said, his tone calm yet commanding, "this case is not just about a speeding ticket. It's about fairness, about ensuring that every individual, regardless of their appearance or age, is afforded the same standard of justice." His words landed heavily, silencing the last of the murmurs in the gallery. Judge Stone leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand as she studied Adrian. Her sharp demeanor had softened considerably, though her eyes remained critical. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Brooks?" Adrian took a steadying breath. "I'm suggesting that the evidence presented is not only unreliable, but that it violates the principles of due process. Without proper calibration records, the radar's accuracy is in question. Without consistent reporting, the officer's testimony is incomplete. And without clear evidence, this case should not proceed." The opposing attorney stood abruptly, his voice tinged with frustration. "Your Honor, this is absurd. He's twisting technicalities too." Judge Stone raised a hand, silencing him. "Sit down, counselor," she said firmly, her gaze returned to Adrian. "Continue." Adrian nodded and held up his papers. "I've prepared a motion to dismiss the charges based on these deficiencies. The law isn't about technicalities. It's about facts, evidence, and justice." For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Judge Stone reviewed the motion, flipping through its pages with a furrowed brow. Finally she placed it down and looked up at Adrian. "This is," she began, her voice trailing off. She adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "This is remarkably well prepared, Mr. Brooks, far beyond what I've seen from most first-year attorneys." The gallery erupted into whispers again, but a quick rap of Judge Stone's gavel silenced them. She turned to the opposing attorney, who looked visibly flustered. "Counselor, do you have a rebuttal?" The attorney stood, but his hesitation was evident. "No, Your Honor. The defense has presented a compelling argument." Judge Stone's gaze returned to Adrian for a moment. Her usual sternness softened. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice carrying an unexpected warmth, "I misjudged you. When you first walked into this courtroom, you have not only demonstrated a thorough understanding of the law, but have also reminded us all of its purpose. I hereby grant your motion to dismiss the charges." The sound of her gravel echoed in the room, followed by a moment of stunned silence. Then a slow ripple of applause began in the gallery, growing louder as spectators rose to their feet. Adrian looked around, his face a mix of relief and disbelief. Judge Stone stood as well, her expression unreadable. "Court is adjourned," she said before stepping down from the bench. But as she passed Adrian, she paused and extended her hand. "You have a bright future ahead of you, Mr. Brooks. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Adrian shook her hand, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot." But as Adrian left the courtroom that day, he didn't realize this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge and inspire far beyond those walls. The moment Adrian stepped out of the courtroom, the buzz from within followed him like a wave. Reporters, who had been loitering in the courthouse lobby, immediately turned their attention to the young man, cameras flashing as microphones were thrust in his direction. He hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden attention. Adrian Brooks, is it true you passed the bar at 18? One reporter called out. "Did you expect to win today?" Another shouted. Adrian raised a hand signaling for quiet. His expression was calm, though a slight smile betrayed his pride. "I came here to defend myself, just like anyone else would," he said simply. "I didn't expect anything except fairness, and that's exactly what I got." His humility only fueled the intrigue. Within hours, the courtroom clip of his closing argument was trending on social media, amassing millions of views. Comments ranged from at his legal prowess to outrage over the judge's initial treatment of him. Adrian's story was no longer confined to Kingsford County. It had become a national sensation back at home. Adrian's mother Lorraine watched the news coverage with a mix of pride and worry. She had always known her son was special, but she also knew how society often treated young men like him. As reporters dissected every detail of the case, Lorraine's phone buzzed with calls from family, friends, and even strangers offering congratulations. Mom, Adrian said softly as he walked through the door, his tired eyes meeting hers. Lorraine pulled him into a tight embrace, her voice thick with emotion. "You were incredible, Adrian. I just hope they see you for who you are now." But the story didn't end there. The viral attention brought with it both opportunities and challenges. Law firms reached out with internship offers, while advocacy groups highlighted Adrian as a symbol of perseverance and breaking stereotypes. At the same time, skeptics questioned his abilities, framing his success as a lucky anomaly rather than the result of hard work and brilliance. Meanwhile, Judge Barbara Stone faced her own reckoning. In interviews, she openly admitted to underestimating Adrian, using the experience as a personal wake-up call. "That young man reminded me of why I entered this profession. In the first place," she told one journalist, "justice should never hinge on assumptions." The case that began as a simple traffic dispute had sparked a larger conversation about bias, perseverance, and the power of challenging expectations. But even as the world debated his story, Adrian quietly prepared for what came next, because for him this was just the first step towards something far greater. Adrian's story didn't just fade into the background. As another viral moment, it lingered in conversations, classrooms, and courtrooms across the country. People debated not just the brilliance of his legal knowledge, but the deeper issues his case brought to light. How often society judged individuals based on their appearance, age, or circumstances, before giving them a chance to prove themselves. For Adrian, the victory in court wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about showing that talent, intelligence, and determination could come from anywhere if we focus only on what we think someone can't do. Adrian said in an interview, "We'll never see what they're actually capable of." Judge Stone's transformation became another significant takeaway. In later cases, she was noticeably more attentive, pausing to truly listen, rather than relying on her initial impressions. In one interview, she reflected, "That day in court taught me more than years on the bench ever could. Adrian Brooks showed me the power of humility, preparation, and resilience, and he reminded me to look beyond the surface." For viewers and readers of Adrian's story, the moral was simple yet profound. Assumptions are easy, but fairness requires effort. By judging less and listening more, we create space for others to thrive and for their unique gifts to emerge. Adrian became a symbol of perseverance, not just for young aspiring lawyers, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated. Schools invited him to speak, law firms extended invitations, and young people across the nation saw him as proof that brilliance could emerge from the most unexpected places. But Adrian didn't let the fame distract him. He remained focused on his future, determined to use his growing platform to inspire others, to challenge the barriers placed in their paths. Months after the courtroom drama, Adrian Brooks continued to forge his path, unshaken by the attention or scrutiny. He took his newfound platform as a responsibility, using it to mentor young people, advocate for fair treatment, and remind others that success is about persistence and preparation, not just opportunity. In a heartfelt speech at a community event, Adrian summed up his journey. "I didn't walk into that courtroom to prove anyone wrong. I walked in to prove myself right. The truth is, we all have moments when people doubt us, but those moments aren't walls. They're doors waiting to be opened." The audience erupted in applause, but Adrian stayed humble to him. The journey was far from over. He had plans to continue his education, fight for justice, and help others realize their potential. His story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that talent could rise above bias, and that no one's worth should be judged at face value. For viewers hearing Adrian's story, it's a call to action. Take a moment to challenge your assumptions about others the next time you see someone and think you've already figured out their story. Ask yourself, what might you be missing? As Adrian stepped out of the courtroom, the world seemed different not because of the victory, but because he had redefined what it meant to stand up for yourself against all odds. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove anything is possible.